All right, I guess you just won't switch over to the next one. That's really weird. Well, that's what happens when you mess with new settings on a new what do you call this? New studio. So hey guys, welcome. It is your headmaster here at the GQAzndood Gaming Academy. We are doing a sweet, short but sweet Gaming Academy special here for you guys. We're going to be doing a Nintendo Switch roundtable just because there was so much information about the Nintendo Switch. So much good, so much bad, a lot of mix. Maybe we can get some clarification and maybe some understanding on what's going on with this whole Switch 2 situation, especially with all the new news coming up. But of course, let me introduce you to the rest of the faculty here as always. You got my man Blazing Ace Nelson here as well. What's up, Ace? Welcome to Sunday Switch 2 roundtable.
Happy Sunday, everybody. And if I wind up hacking up along over the course of this roundtable, please be advised I'm coming off of being sick. So I'm not at 100%, so I'm not expecting the rest of us to be. But we still got a lot to cover today, even though we're just trying to keep it short. So buckle your seatbelts, ladies and gents. It's going to be a while.
Yeah, I feel like there was so much to talk about that we weren't able to fit in the normal academy that we had to get our own special segment for this. So speaking of bringing all the news and info and inside scoop, got ourselves here, Nick, the Tragically Elite. What up, man?
Hey, guys. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
Hope you're feeling better, Ace.
Well, man, that catfish was doing a number on me earlier. Hence why I was coughing so much.
You better get some hauls or something. Yeah, so we got a lot to talk about here, and I'm curious on everyone's perspective on this because there's a lot floating around about the Nintendo Switch. A lot of good, a lot of bad. There seems to be like a Nintendo Switch civil war happening. Got Nintendo loyalists excusing the high prices, right? We got Nintendo defectors that are like, "Whoa, I'm never going to buy a Nintendo product again." So I kind of want to know what kind of what everyone stands on everything is tonight. So I'm open to both sides. I'm looking to hear and listen to everything. I'm just kind of here to talk about Nintendo Switch. So I don't know, where should we start?
Oh, there's so much to talk about. At least for me, like broad overview. I remember as news was trickling out over the couple days from the showcase to the Treehouse showcases as well over Thursday, Friday. I was shooting messages with James, and I was just like, "Hey, man, this is like everything's changing day to day. Like new information comes out, more people are freaking out. It adds more and more context to this. So for me, especially like going into this weekend, I'm like, I feel like there's so much context around this release, like more than normal, that's causing this rift, like you talked about. And that's in the context, again, on top of that, of the gaming industry as a whole right now. So, I mean, like, first and foremost, where we should start, definitely suggest talking about the actual Switch 2 showcase itself. I don't know about you two, how you feel about it, but I think, going back to the start of all of this entire kind of conversation was from that actual showcase. And for the most part, across the board, everyone loved the showcase. As the showcase goes, all the stuff that we've been seeing, no one has said like a bad thing about how the showcase rolled out. Then we started getting details afterwards that then people kind of went back to. If you look at some of like the big names in the space, like I know that Kind of Funny, for example, had a bunch of people like watching their like round table, and they were giving the showcase like 9.5s out of 10s. Giving keeping tons of praise on Nintendo, like deservedly so. At least we know, the games that were out there, the games that they showed, the way they rolled it out, it looked impressive. It was a great showcase of everything. But then as they're going through that roundtable, I think it was like an hour and a half, news started trickling out about pricing and stuff because that wasn't in the showcase. And then things kind of kicked off from there. So first and foremost, you two, what do you two think about the showcase itself? Did it do what you needed to do for you, as its own thing without the context of the rest of the crap that happened afterwards?
Like honestly, for me, I would definitely say yeah, the Switch 2 showcase. Like, I mean, let's face it, just as a general rule, I don't I don't usually purchase systems like on release. I'm just I like to give it time to breathe, give it time to work out a lot of the kinks that usually do arise, when a system is first announced or first released. So, it wasn't something that made just as a general rule, it wasn't something that would make me go, I want to pick this up day one. But the way they were, the way the showcase rolled out the specs, rolled out some of the launch shots, at the very least, just some of the big hitters that the Switch 2 was going to be, you know, putting in front of everyone to like say, as the welcome mat to the Switch 2. So definitely, you know, Metroid Prime 4, Metroid Prime 4, Donkey Kong, uh, Mario Kart World. They put the tent poles, the flagship games at the forefront, and everything looked really solid. And then just how they were showcasing the tech behind the Switch 2 itself, with like the magnetic locking for the Joy Cons, which alleviates one of the major pain points of the old system. That being,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
the rails on the
the
side of that thing.
rails, and how you could potentially slide those things in backwards, and that is that's a whole nother topic in and of itself, a whole nother nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, and we were a little bit surprised with a lot of the stuff that was leading up to the release of it. Remember, during our last couple classes that we held, or podcasts that we were doing, and plenty of other people were too, was the amount of like rumors that were floating around there. Nintendo played it pretty close to the vest with everything that came out. Like there was a lot of surprises, some stuff that was kind of like, oh, that's what they were kind of going for. That the leaks were like dancing around, like the C button, like what that was going to be, stuff like that. So they answered those kind of big things, and like you said, they did show off the specs that people wanted to know about, like the screen, how that dock's going to look, how the controllers are going to look. Those were kind of the big things. What about you, James? What do you think about the showcase itself?
Well, Nintendo's has always done a good job with their directs, and I think it's cool that they're keeping that to close to heart with them. Like they're having their own people do it per se. I mean, I feel like as a Japanese company, that's very important to them that they represent it. They represent Nintendo and their product in their own way, right?
Mhm.
So that's that's nothing new here. So it's like they've kind of set the benchmark for that. And I think like it's given the people what they want. It wasn't necessarily the presentation that was the issue, because I had no problem with that, and I think it was great. Honestly, I think it was just the content, the information within the presentation that was the issue, right? Because like I said, Nintendo's always good giving out that information to us, right?
Yeah, and there were certain bits of information that even after how impressive that showcase was, you know people were asking the important questions already. How, what's the barrier to entry? What are we going to have to pay to lay hands on this thing?
Yeah,
Well, that
well,
was the thing throughout it too. Was everyone you watch some people like doing reactions to it, a couple different people like on Twitch or any of those platforms throughout the entire thing. They're like, "This looks great. I'm excited. This looks great. This looks great. Wow, look at all this third party support that they're throwing in here too." And there's going to be a Switch exclusive like from software game. Like Nintendo was
Hmm.
pulling out some pretty heavy hitters there as far as like selling us on that. But then they got to the end of the stream when the directors were standing up and saying thank you very much. That's all we're going to share now. Everyone's like, wait, they're not sharing the price. That's when people started doing that thing. We're like, hold on, let me roll back here, and like now you're
I
looking at
missed something.
that
Yeah,
entire thing with a new lens where you're like, hey, there's some weird stuff in here, like that tech demo that they're going to charge you for, kind of thing, stuff like that. Where
it's
it's like,
dumb.
hold on, that's wait, what? So yeah, there's a lot of like great showcase, cool way to roll it out. There was not a lot of things that like were left for like, wow, I wish I would have had more of this, minus then pricing hit. And they said, later today we'll release prices about, the games. And it's like, that's kind of a weird thing not to include in this showcase thing that you guys are doing. So yeah, it was just kind of it was a very weird kind of thing that has now led to the rest of this. But yeah, seeing that kind of like live reaction, it was very nuanced from a lot of people. You started seeing that fracturing where people were like, this is great. I got to see this. I got to see Mario. I got to see, oh, look, DK's back and it looks like a Mario Odyssey. The screen, like we saw, looks great. That deck, that has its own built-in fan now to handle those like heavier games. So like we know now Cyberpunk's going to be on there, whatever the new FromSoft game is going to be, any of those other big third-party titles. I mean, Borderlands 4 was dropped as well. Like another heads up from Randy that Borderlands 4 is coming to Switch. But yeah, it was starting to shade the rest of that, and I think people started going like, "Hey, this looks great. Wait a second, what about all these like big losses?" So, that was the showcase. Usually, like across the board, like I said, most people seem to like view it favorably. But Ace, how did you feel when you saw the prices drop on the games? Because that's really like the console. Like, let's be honest, the console for the most part was kind of what people were expecting. Like a $399 was what a lot of people were expecting, or a lot of people were kind of like hinting at or kind of feeling okay about. But then they hit that 450, and everyone's kind of like, yeah, sure, not a big deal. But the game itself, that software price, that's when it broke.
Yeah, the software price. And wasn't it like, I think it was for Mario Kart World, wasn't the digital one apparently going to be cheaper than the physical?
No. So, and one of the biggest things I wanted to do on this little Sunday stream we're doing is like really talk about the context of this and why I think this is blowing up the way it is and why there's so much discourse. But that was part of that misinformation that's out there. There's no proof that it's going to be 90 physical in the US. What we saw was 90 euros in Europe. And then a bunch of people thought, hey, that's going to be the price in the US for physical. It's not. That it's already, you go to any of those retailers' websites right now that are like already starting to list those, and it's $79.99 for physical copies. It's not digital. I'm sorry, it's not more expensive for physical. At least as of right now.
Okay, that was one of the things I was a little, that was one of the things I was a little confused on. So I wanted to, kind of hold back and wait until I actually got, got a little more context on that. But
yeah, dude, welcome to like what the issue is right now.
Just as a whole, though, with the pricing for a lot of these games being announced, it's like, I feel like, I feel like Nintendo is, still starting to inch more towards those, more towards those higher prices. And it's like, again, that's likely to cause people to, withhold their immediate purchase. It's not, prices have at the very least hit that point where impulse buying is, it's not guaranteed anymore.
Sure. James, how about you? About the price dropping on the games when you saw that?
Well, I mean, if even if it was 90 euros and we're consistent on that, that's still $98 USD. So hopefully it's not.
Well, they've
90
said
period.
though that's just for that market. In Europe, it's going to be that price. I think the biggest problem to this is Nintendo has a big communication issue right now, where it's going to be priced in different markets to meet the market value. So it's going to be that price there. It's still staying 80 in the US unless tariffs change it. Now that's a whole nother thing at the end of this that just kind of cropped up in this last day in the US market.
Yeah.
And that's another conversation that I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. But it's not changing that. But that is part of the problem, is everyone kind of took that and ran with it and spread it everywhere. You can look at like reels that just popped up in the days afterwards and everyone's saying, 90 physical, 90 physical. And then that becomes the thing that everyone's talking about, and we just assume it's the case because everyone's referencing it.
Well, yeah,
right?
They read the headline and that's it. Right. I get it.
Right,
Yeah.
for sure. And that is part of Nintendo's problem with this. So your first response was with the console. Did you feel that was priced right where it was?
You're referring to like the $449 versus the $499?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it has to be more expensive than the Switch One. Otherwise, why would you get a Switch One at this point, right? So, what is it right now? $299, $349 for the OLED, right? And then so the next one up clearly it's about $449 more, and it plays old Switch games, right? So I think that's an acceptable upgrade if you're looking, get rid of your old one and buy a new one. I kind of miss the days where the games were included anyway for an added value, instead of charging you $50 more, right? And then the whole reason for this is because they have no competitor. Like, they can charge you that now, and this is why I say, what is this? Innovation breeds. What do you call this?
Competition breeds
Competition breeds
innovation.
innovation, right? Since they don't have competition, it's like, well, yeah, they're pretty much saying, well, you don't have a choice, like you just have to buy our stuff. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind, and and this is why they're never going to let these Nintendo games on the Steam Deck. But anyway, not to stray off that, but I brought up this image here just to kind of give you guys context on Nintendo games back in 1998, right? And these are probably lowered prices because I don't remember Donkey Kong on release being $52.99. It was probably like $69.99 at the time.
I say C coupon, so that might have been the coupon price.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, look at Hang Time. That's not a first party Nintendo game. It's $70, right? And I think at the time there was a conversation that if there was a game that was licensed by some sort of entity, like whether it's a movie or like NBA, it was a little bit more expensive. But I could be wrong because Ultimate MK3 right there is also $70. It's an arcade port, right? So it's hard to determine those prices, just kind of like this conversation we're having now. But if you use these prices and adjust for inflation, they're pretty much equivalent to what Nintendo's asking of us to play now. Right. So I've been telling this to a lot of people that video games have been inflation proof for the past like 30 years. And we've been eating good, folks. Right. What's not cool is that, before they argued that digital would be cheaper for us and physical would be more expensive because, they're saving money on printing. And now it's kind of like reverse, and I don't want to go to it in too detailed just yet. But I did hear that you're not going to get the full game on the card, just a key pass for the digital game. And so what's the point? You just have this piece of plastic that you need to use to access your digital game now. So that's that. I don't want to get into that too quick, but prices wise, like, the price for this much is for you to keep and for you to own as yourself, because we talk about ownership and having to have assets, right? Especially in the video game community, having your collection. But now it's like even that within itself, that culture of not having the game on the cartridge, I think that's the really main issue. If people had their full game on the cart, I think they'd be okay to pay those exorbitant prices, right? But the fact that they don't have the game, but more just a key code to access the game online, that changes up the game a little bit. It's almost like, do you guys remember back in the PlayStation 3 era where you needed the gameplay pass to play online with your friend for each individual game? It was like $5, right? So like to play the multiplayer portion of it, they would charge you $5, like from like God of War or something. And then they would charge you $5 to play this game with other people online, but you don't have to get PSN Plus. It was the weirdest thing. So I think they're trying to figure out a way, and maybe they're trying to let's see what we can do in the next generation of gaming, because the console wars are over. So now they're kind of flexing and be like, well, we don't have competition anymore. What can we do to maximize our profits? Because things are getting expensive, right? And I can agree with that. But it also has to toe this fine line of like consumer friendliness and, of course, not damaging your reputation. Now, as far as prices go, I do the research and I'm like, you know what, man, we've been inflation proof on games for a longest time. I do still have a problem with the high prices of it, but at the same time, I feel like, that it's kind of warranted. Like, if these games need to be sold at a certain price to keep these studios open as well, I think it's important that they do that. But also, you gotta throw out quality games, because back then we didn't have patches, right? This is the game that we got, and this is the game we paid for. So that's kind of like my first reaction to the prices. All these emotions and thoughts came up back in the 90s, right? Because I feel all of a sudden like I'm 13 again. Like, oh man, these are expensive games, kind of like that.
Wonder why our parents were so upset about buying us those games.
Yeah, so, now I'm a parent now.
Yeah, I get it. I'm happy you brought up this image, because this is something that over the last couple days, especially, a lot of people have picked up on this and the traction on this.
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest, like people look at this and like, hey, price is price. Like you said, inflation proof for a long time in the industry. We've known that. That's why we started seeing stuff kind of creep up and games start to hit that, $70 range. And we're like, okay, this is starting to make more sense with the size of games. We've talked ad nauseum about the high cost of development, and the biggest piece of context that we really need to discuss is what you just brought up. It's similar to SNES 64 prices. Sure. Adjusted for inflation, these would be over triple digits, like nowadays. So that's just the way it is. You have to really think about the context of the time. The cost to make physical back then, these carts, was definitely higher. That's why these ones were high at that mark. You have to remember too that right as this kind of generation was ending, PlayStation dropped the cheaper disc-based development format, and then everyone shifted to that, and that's why those prices kind of changed up. The market really dictated this. Not only that, when you look at these console prices, or sorry, these cart prices, and you think about like the market as a whole, there was a whole rental market back then. You know, you go to a Hollywood Video or Blockbuster, physical games, you know, back then easier to share. You just go and you can rent it for a few bucks. Like the question then kind of shifts to, does this price feel worth it? And really the biggest problem is disposable income nowadays.
Hmm.
Cost of living is increasing. Well, in general, wages haven't kept pace. So that kind of means we have to the money that we have to spend on things like games are like an increasingly smaller portion or cut of that pie, right? So a $70 game even a couple years ago feels less expensive than the $70 game in the coming year or an $80 game in the coming year, just because of that difference. You
Yeah.
rent, internet, grocery, taxes, not to mention subscriptions now that are locking you out of just about anything too, including features in some of these games you're buying. It's just that big context of the situation when you look at these prices. What about you, Ace? With that in mind, what are you thinking?
Uh, well, again, it's still, it's just like you said, $70, $70 for a game purchase, or $70 for discretionary spending on games used to go a lot further, even a generation ago, than it does now, and than it likely will, in the coming years. Especially, again, adding a little bit of additional context to this, which I'm sure we'll be discussing later. The situation with tariffs on imports and exports.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
here's a really interesting observation. Like, if you look at the screen right here, we just saw NBA Hang Time for the N64. No, Super Nintendo, right? $69.99. But NBA Hang Time on the
PlayStation.
PlayStation's $47.99. So what Lead is saying is completely accurate. If anything, Sony drove the prices down on video games because of the manufacturing costs, right? Which kind of helped us kind of backpedal a little bit on pricing. Like I said, if we're thinking, these little carts or game cards cost more to make than the cartridges, let's just say they're about the same, like just for the sake of our conversation, right? The difference still is you get the full game on the cartridge, not on the card. And then what Ace was saying is that these older games just go the longest way because that was the final form of the game, right? And right now, even though let's just say, okay, well, fine, adjustments to inflation's great, production costs, we accept that. We still don't get the full game on the cart, and that's kind of the issue. I think if people were to agree with the pricing, they still have that obstacle of like, well, the game's not even on the cart then, so what's the point, right? So, but
are you talking specifically about the Game Key games?
Yeah, that one.
Okay. Because not every game is like that. Only
Correct,
select ones.
correct, and hopefully that'll reflect on the pricing, right? So, like I said, I'm not going to blanket statement all the games. If each publisher or developer wants to do their pricing differently, in accordance to the market, how they feel this game costs in the industry, then I would excuse those higher prices if the full game was on there, right, for that price. Because, like, for example, this is my first one was if I bought. I think you can kind of empathize on this. You remember Horizon, like the collector's edition, like you got the game key, not the disc on that thing. But you're like, why though? I'm paying an extra more for this thing versus, I'm taking the extra effort to pay for a collector's edition, but yet I don't get a disc, right? How much is that disc? It's just
the big one. The big one, really, that the problem is Avowed right now too, and I think Scorpio mentioned it in chat, but that was like the most recent one that kind of did this, all that collector's edition stuff, and then no disc in it. That's just the way things have started to go, and that's where the industry is.
Yep.
I think the last little bit of context to really like throw on top of this is just understanding that this is Nintendo. Right. I think the big reason that so many people have this pushback and why the showcase and everything that came out of the next couple days became such an inflection point is because this is Nintendo. You know, you have people that have a vision of this company kind of jammed up against some pretty anti-consumer optics, right? The
Yeah.
company, like others, they do have to run a business. We know that. And, you know, anti-consumer choices are always going to be part of the process. And let's not absolve Nintendo of like some stuff that's happened in the last few years, you know, about pushing back against a lot of different things, very protective of their IPs, right? So while the showcase was great, Nintendo has this problem with communication where all this misinformation is flying around. People are defending it because of the perception of like these family-friendly games that they make. But the big N isn't able to effectively discuss things like pricing in local markets, details about the game key versions, the difference between prices in their launch window titles, because DK is $10 less. They can't explain to us like why that difference is. They just released it into the wild, and now everyone is kind of taking it, running with it, right?
And that's
and
what
kind of
happens
making
when
their
you have
own
leaks,
narratives.
for sure. And like, for example, there is that like leak right now. Speaking of prices, like they were saying like the Japanese version of the Switch 2 is cheaper than like the what do you call this? The international version.
Oh
Right?
yeah, we were talking about that.
Yeah, like what the heck? That makes no sense. So clearly there needs to be some sort of explanation for that, and that could actually fall in line with what you said. You know, the market value of the Switch 2 in that market is different than it would be in Japan, right? So that's why I'm open to the discussion. I'm open to hearing the information out there.
I saw Ace make a face. Ace, did you not know that? Japan has its own cheaper version.
Yeah, like this is the first time I'm hearing about it. I'm like,
so
what's
again, this
what's
was
the deal
people taking information and running with it kind of thing. So in Japan, the Switch is selling for roughly $330, like equivalent. But what people aren't realizing is that is region locked, Japan only, Japanese language only, and in a market where the yen is weaker. Adjusted for the difference, it comes out to just about the same price as the US one. So it's really not different, but people are seeing price point, and extrapolating. You can get it cheaper in Japan. They did release, like, I want to say the next day, James and I were talking in DMs, and we're like, hey, there's an international edition, as it were, where they have just language support and open region that's coming out of Japan. The cost is the same as the US one. Like, there's no difference. But again, Nintendo is not explaining that. People are seeing prices and running with it. So there's this problem that the company has kind of reining in information. It's just running wild.
Scorpio, to answer your question about why Dragon Age 1 and the Veilguard are the same price when we all know which one is not worth it, is because the price of games isn't dictated by how good the game is. that no matter how you feel on a game, that's not going to dictate the price, because there are some great games that are for $20 that I played, like Sunset Riders and Super Nintendo. I didn't dictate that price. So software, etc., dictated that price when they didn't sell that game on the shelf for 90 days. So that's a quick explanation for you. I don't know what to tell you.
Just to hit a couple more of like the big informations that kind of dropped, just because this is what people are kind of talking about with this. We know that in dock mode, the console can do 4K 60 frames a second, which is awesome. People are loving that. The built-in fan will help with those higher loads on some of those games that are a lot more like graphically intense or process intense. It does say in the direct, that it is 4K on supported games. So that's going to come down to the devs themselves kind of packing that in, and those third-party games will certainly have that support. It's on their other titles, but it's kind of like a little bit in the sense like it's not as powerful as like the Series X or the PS5 Pro or anything like that. So there's still going to be some tweaking. We know that in handheld, it's 120 hertz, 1080p. It's LCD, but it will have HDR support. NVIDIA just came out and we're talking about the chip that they built specifically for this, and it will have AI-powered DLSS. They released the big factoid sheet for marketing, and we found out that the battery life is 2 to 6.5 hours. Which is roughly the same as the original Switch, or about the industry standard that you see on like the Steam Deck and stuff. So it's going to come down to the individual game. Like if you're booting up Cyberpunk, that's going to, in handheld mold, that's just going to tank your system battery life, right? One little other bit of information that was kind of confirmed was we found out that Mario Kart World is 23.4 gigabytes in size. That's 3 times the size of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe in terms of the content and everything and the data that's in there. So if you're wondering about that difference in price, it's 3 times the size of a game data wise. So we'll see with like content and all the stuff they pack into it, but that can tell you a little bit about why that price may be a little different, what they're kind of packing in there. For me, like Mario Kart 8, or sorry, Mario Kart World, I was telling James this right away. It just felt like Forza Horizon to me, like a lot of stuff that Forza's been doing for a few iterations. Now Nintendo's kind of grabbing some of that stuff and squeezing it into their game. I kind of told him, like, when we were talking about doing this Sunday stream, like, for me, the title of this is like Nintendo finally, in parentheses, enters the current generation. You know, it's finally meeting modern console standards, and it's meeting that price point as well and pushing it up in some places. So some people are, you know, taking that as that. It's like, this is not what Nintendo's known for. Think about the Switch 1, man. It was underpowered, but it had the games you want to play. And Nintendo benefited heavily in that generation with that Switch release of this big push towards indie. So their game system was able to play a lot of the games that became giant hits, you know, like Minecraft, for example, when that blew up, like that could run on a Switch, and it came to the Switch. So some of the biggest titles that were just blowing up the market, like Nintendo, were able to take full advantage of that. If, you know, those underpowered, let's say, games didn't release, become phenomenons, we don't know where the Switch would be. It happened to capitalize at just the right time, a little bit of luck, a little bit of risk. But it's crazy to see now as the Switch 2's releasing, it's a different market out there, guys.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. And like I said, and the big thing too is that I feel like Nintendo, and this is kind of similar. I feel like I'm seeing history repeat itself here. Kind of like the issue when the 360 was the king of that generation, that 6th gen, 7th gen. I think it's 7th gen. Was the king of the console market, and then the Xbox One was handled so bad, right? Because like they were like on top, right? And so that they sold you an extra camera, they sold you all these extra things that you're like, I don't know if I want that. So and I think it because this came up when I saw the camera too for the Switch, and I was like, I'm getting Kinect vibes. Oh no, you know. And so and that because they were on top at that time, and I think Sony is making that same mistake now, becoming like, you know, like that's why their game, to my opinion, like their games have kind of like. Their support's kind of died down on certain games, like single player games and stuff like that. But Nintendo is its own competition. They're in competition with themselves at this point, right? Because they can't really. The other two don't really compete with the Switch, like you said. Like they ran games on their own terms, right? They had their own versions of the games that were out on those other consoles, and they just sold more units than everybody else, right? So right now they're sitting on the top of what they're doing. Right, I'm still not even going to compare the Switch 2 to the other two consoles, just because the other two consoles can't do what the Switch 2 does, which take it with you, like with convenience, right? So, I think this is why the decisions are kind of like weird right now, but we'll see once we get more information.
Yeah, in private chat, I sent a article. You know, whether or not you follow Polygon, this was an article that provided some of the context that I highly recommend people read. It just talks about how the Switch, everything went Nintendo's way, both by design and by good fortune. They assembled arguably the greatest first-party lineup in history. Indie development exploded, and a new wave of beloved IP, Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, designed for smartphone-level specs, meant that Nintendo's hardware unintentionally could play some of the biggest games on the planet. So it's just one of those things that the Switch 2 benefited from the market at the time. And if you do take, you know, 5 minutes to read through that at some point, it really shows how it's a mix of like luck and industry trends a lot of times for companies. But the Switch rode that. And now that the Switch 2 is now meeting kind of the current gen, but still kind of lagging behind in terms of horsepower, it's always going to come down to the same age-old adage of, you know, it's going to come down to the games. You know, what do you want to play and how do you want to play it? And that's really going to be whether or not this is going to be a value for you. You know, money aside, that Ace, like you said, like day one buy-in, you may not. I know myself, I wasn't going to buy in day one, but when I watch these showcases, I can fully admit it gets me hyped up, and I'm like, oh, now I'm more interested in this thing. Now I may look into like saving a little bit of money, and I feel like I want to pick this up day one. And that's someone like, for me, we've said before, I don't own a Switch 1. I'm interested, right? So this is about trying to reach a broader market, trying to end up in a market as well where handhelds are completely different now than they were in the past. The handheld market with the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, whatever Microsoft is cooking up with their next handheld. We've talked about that before. The Switch 2 has a lot more working against it, and I think with those price points is going to make that much harder of a sell. If you look at the entry level Steam Deck, not to say it's apples to apples, but if you look at the entry level Steam Deck, it's got hardware, battery life kind of on par with what the Switch 2 is already. The screen and some of the behind the scenes stuff is obviously going to be better on the Switch 2. I'm not trying to make a broad scope, talk across about it, generalize, but it does show spec wise it's pretty darn close. So it's like, what are you going to get then? It's got to be those Nintendo titles, and Nintendo knows that, like James said earlier.
Nintendo, like this article hits it pretty good because the title Nintendo wants to compete in a new type of console war. I feel like every generation of video games usually has some sort of like leading trend, right? And whether it's BRs or MOBAs, right? We've seen these like the popularity of certain things in certain eras of video games happen. Like it went from what was that? Not foosball, but like Pong to like pinball, right? To there's always eras of that. Now I feel like we're aside from the decline of what do you call it? Not hero shooters, but BRs, right? The new thing that's trending right now for all three of these companies that I'm kind of looking at is they're going with how can you play on our platform more available than any other platform, right? The Xbox is doing this with their whole anything's an Xbox. Sony's kind of doing it with their like what is that? Their like remote play with like what do they call it? The backbone, whatever they call it.
The PlayStation Portal, right?
Yeah, the Portal, right? So they're doing their own thing. Like they're kind of competing with like Steam Deck and stuff like that. Play your PlayStation games on the go with this thing, right? Stuff like that. But Nintendo's kind of the king of that already. They were like already ahead of that trend from last, because they went. I feel like Sony and Microsoft were like, we're gonna fight on who's the burliest and the best graphics. Nintendo's like, we're just gonna do their own thing. You can play your Nintendo games anywhere, right? And now they go, well, the Switch sold so much, more than both of us combined, Microsoft and Sony. Now we got to go after Nintendo because they're already ahead of units before us, So I feel like now they're ahead of that game. They have a good head start, hence why the pricing is really good for them. Now Sony and Xbox have to kind of play catch up with their own kind of tech and their own kind of way to show like you should be playing on our platform instead. But like I said, you can't play Mario on anything else except a Switch, right? That's why I think that's where they're winning on the exclusivity. Because now Sony and Microsoft are swapping on like, our first party games will be on the PC and stuff like that. So they're playing their own kind of war, and right now Nintendo's winning that version of that war. So
yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about before with like what you want to play and how you want to play is going to dictate whether or not the system is going to be worthwhile to you. I mean, Nintendo first party games still through some kind of like black magic works fantastic on every hardware they put out, right? So the first party stuff is going to be great almost always. The third party games are really the kind of like crux of this. Like, we know that there's a lot more third party games in this one. Like we said, they're kind of joining the current generation and bringing these big titles in and being able to play them on the Switch finally, right? But if you're looking to have it all in one place and you play mostly those third party ones, then the Switch 2 isn't going to be for you. We already know that CD Projekt Red has said that it's running at 40 frames a second docked in performance mode for the game. We do also know, and they've already said, all of Cyberpunk fits on the cart. It's not a download for that one.
That's cool.
Yeah. I think I wrote it down somewhere. CDPR said that Cyberpunk is fully on the cartridge because they bought the higher capacity cartridge from Nintendo to put the games on. So that's the 64 gigabyte cart release. That was from their community manager. So one of the biggest things is, we were talking about that heat card thing earlier. The reason that happened on the last generation of the Switch, because there are games like that, was like the cart or a digital code because it wouldn't fit on the cart, is because Nintendo would sell to developers 3 or 4 different levels of cartridge size, and the developer would have to purchase, kind of like we were talking about carts earlier, right? The devs would have to buy the cart and put the data on that cart. Same for these key cards. From what we've been reading now, and again, this is a matter of like what information is real out there, what can we believe? It sounds like the Switch 2 carts have shrunk that, and you only have a couple choices. So indie games fit on the small ones, and if you have a large game, if you're not able or willing to spend the high price to put it on those big cartridges, you have to do the key card thing. So Nintendo's potentially restricting the physical market in another way and pushing you towards digital that way as well.
Gotcha. Well, see, that's good context, right? Because before, without knowing that, we could just be like, well, screw these guys, right? So there has to be some sort of nuance and explanation of why certain games are the way they are. So that's good to know. That's why it's good to have that information.
But Nintendo's not discussing that. They're not letting people know, and people are running rampant with that information. So now we're stuck in this as consumers going like, why the hell can I have my game on the cart? When the devs are like, this is just what we can choose from, man. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing though, we're not us three in here, we're not average consumers. That's the problem, right? And so that information you just couldn't divulge to us will probably be like this to a lot of people, and they just go, that doesn't help me pay an extra $10 more, right? Because they don't care about that. So and I think that's why they're not talking or discussing about that. Maybe they should have their own like maybe specific Q&A sessions, right, from Nintendo versus like learning it from a YouTuber, right? Like, because this way, if these YouTubers can ask these hard hitting specific questions of why they're caught, more like an interview, right? Because I don't think they're gonna divulge that explanation on a direct like this, because they just want to know what the games are, how many players, right, stuff like that, how much it costs. For the standard consumer, but I get it, and that's why I feel like we should have that, and maybe Nintendo should have that down the road, because you made the observation that they're really bad at sharing that kind of information with us.
Yeah, and I mean, some of it, like the price of carts and stuff, is just kind of what gets out there from developers discussing it. Like, it's not going to be common knowledge stuff, so that's kind of like wishing that'll happen. It's not always going to happen, I know that, but it's still, like you said, a context to it for us to understand like why this is kind of pricing this way, why we're seeing these prices, and telling people like, hey, like, look into it a little bit, look beyond the like gotcha headlines or like just what influencers are kind of like parroting out there. Like, absolutely, it's good to take everything like that with a grain of salt. We mentioned the Mario Kart World being about 24 gigabytes. Donkey Kong is only 10 gigabytes. So significantly smaller comparatively. It's a smaller game. Mario Odyssey, that might be why that cost is the way it is as well. But again, you're not going to know that until you like legit look at the cartridges, compare, and like people discuss it, right? So it's strange, man.
It's like Tech said in the chat. You know, it's more. It seems more like we're paying not for the physical media anymore. We're not paying for the cartridge. We're paying for the data.
Hey, man, welcome to streaming. Do you buy CDs anymore, or do you listen to Spotify?
Well, I mean, it's no different than when these phone companies charge you for data, bros. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're charging you legitimately for how much usage you have of the data. You know, and fortunately, at least there's a cap. You know, like if they said, for example, down the road, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, if you played this game more than 120 hours, we're going to charge you this much for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, versus like $80, it's yours. But because somebody that spends 10 hours on the game, maybe we'll pay $10. But if you spend 120, maybe pay 100. I wouldn't put it past them.
I don't want metered stuff like that, man.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just the way though these companies work, the way just, you know, capitalism works, is that they want to kind of get as much as possible from you in any way they can. Ready Player One, right? Weren't they selling you screen size on those specific samples? Or like, we're going to charge premium and for 10% more screen size, so you can see more of the screen in this first-person shooter. It was kind of crazy, right? But it's kind of outlandish. But I wouldn't put it past that. The fact that they're making fun of that means they thought about that. They could possibly do that down the road, right? So and I think what's more important to me is as far as coming from like the 80s, right? Is that, for example, let me kind of like set the tone here. I am not going to get a Switch 2 day one. I am not hyped for it whatsoever, and it has nothing to do with the price, right? I'm just not a big Nintendo person, right? I love having the Nintendo games in my collection, and that's probably why I want physical games from them. I want to keep them there. I want to hold them as a piece of history. I've always had that done in the 80s and the 90s, right? And continued that. I skipped the N64 generation. I defected to the PlayStation, right? But that doesn't stop me from loving Nintendo and like loving the stuff that they put out. This is why I'm pushing for that. I still want physical, and I feel like as a consumer, I always want to have access to what I purchase without an internet connection. I know internet is a big thing in people's lives, but when that power goes out and you want to play a game, right? Maybe you have a charged Switch. You got a few hours to keep yourself entertained until the power comes back on. And that's what I mean.
Or let's say there's a network service outage, as Comcast is known to do.
And if you think about it, we're this is more of a cultural thing. Like we're going to be under the mercy of data, like what you're saying. We're paying for data, right? To access your games, I need an internet connection. To turn on my PlayStation, I need an internet connection. That's theoretical, right? So I don't want to be under the hammer and fist of like you need an internet connection. You need to be paying Comcast this to access the stuff you've already bought. I want the option to, if I wanted to, and if I do jump into that, it should be more convenient for me because I'm paying for it at a premium versus not paying for it, right? But I still want access to the stuff I paid for. Like PSN Plus free games, I don't get upset if I don't have PSN Plus if I don't have them, right? It's part of the subscription. I use PSN Plus to play with my friends, not for the free games. I don't get upset about that. What I will get upset about is I bought a physical game like CTR, right? And then the half of this is just to install. And so if the internet goes off and I just want to play kart racing and I can't play because I need an internet connection, I will be upset because I bought this to have this next to me and for me to be here, right? And that's kind of, I think, why there's a maybe the new gen and the old school like me don't agree on this because we're from two different generations. But to me, that's always going to be why I spend money on something that expensive. It's worth it to have it, right? But if I'm not having it, I don't know if it is worth it. And that's just coming from me, an OG.
No, I mean, that's certainly understandable. You made a good case for it. We said before,
honestly, it's not even the price. It's not even the price that bugs me. It's not even the price that bugs me. Honestly, it's honestly how you own it. That's what bugs me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit different for each person. I've started to move away from physical just because I've been running out of space. There's still games that I prefer to buy physical because it's something that's special to me or something that I really want to hold on to, so I do like having that option. So I'm kind of like that middle ground right now, where if you look at my wall over here, I have a bunch of steelbook cases. I collect steelbooks from series that I really, really enjoy. I bought the Veilguard Collector's Edition, or at least the Virantium Edition, because I really wanted that steelbook and I was going to buy the game anyway. So I'll have reasons to do those things, right? But there are times when it's just like you said, I'll have something like Xbox Live or PSN Plus, and I'll download a game and I'm fine having it digital because I'll play it a few times and I probably won't revisit it. Like, it's fine for me then. It's not going to take up space. And I usually don't go back to play it. My backlog is huge enough as is, and I'm always kind of playing the new thing. So for me, it makes sense to have both. But like you said, and like I said, I would prefer to have the option of physical. But businesses can't rely on me possibly buying their physical one. It's that gamble of just like, will this person buy it or not? It's just super interesting because we also found out when they the devs did their volume 16 of their Ask the Dev series that I think came out like a day or two ago. They were talking about how the Switch 2 hardware is completely different from the Switch 1 hardware. Like, the hardware is completely different. That's part of the reason you're seeing that difference in price. It's completely new. Yep. That's also part of the reason why Switch 1 games don't natively play on the Switch 2. And they explained that what they're doing is basically a hybrid approach that is like between a software emulator and a hardware compatibility. So it doesn't play natively, but that's their workaround. So that's why they released a list, and there's a big list that had some stuff on there where third-party games specifically aren't compatible right now on the Switch 2. They're currently being investigated is what they're throwing on there. So over time that'll change, but that's something a bunch of other people were discussing as well. It's like, I have physical, now I can't play it. The whole point of X Nintendo system is it's backwards compatible. It's like
Yeah.
it is, but it isn't. This is a jump for the system. So again, context difference. There's a lot of moving parts happening with this, and now the more and more we learn, I feel like this launch of the Switch 2 is just kind of a difficult watershed moment for the company where it wasn't really handled well. I mean, we're seeing this here in the background too. We haven't even talked about the Switch 2 camera and that chat feature, man.
Yeah.
Like the frame rate on that is rough. A lot of people brought up some very interesting things about it. You know, like if you're playing games with your friends, you're in those friend groups and you can trust who you're using the camera with. But at the same time, you can hop into, remember happened on the 360 with the camera and Uno? People just kind of hanging weighing.
They got to know that it's the internet, right? And
Right.
here's the thing, like this is why it's so strange to me why they had this camera. This could have been done on a headset, right? I don't think they need the camera, to be honest with you. Like yet alone have because I don't like talking to people, strangers, if anything, right? But with your friends, why don't I just put that on a first party headset that Nintendo could make or collaborate with another headset company? Right, it's a convenience thing, especially if you're taking this on the go. Clearly, that camera was meant for you to be at home, right? Because it's just there, and it's an awkward design as well. It's just an encumbering thing to another thing to add to it, and this is why I think like they kind of made the Connect route, where they're like they just wanted to sell you something extra that's like first party and peripheral. You can't make this by a third party, right? So because they can, you don't have another choice. That's why. So that's one of the small things that I noticed about like the history repeating itself with stuff like that.
And this is to say, like, some of the people who are in chat, like, this isn't 100% negative. There's some really cool things. I do like that GameShare feature they were discussing.
Oh, I love that. I love that feature. It's so cool.
Right. Really, really handy for families. And that kind of was the last little piece of the puzzle as I was kind of like watching the reaction to this was all the way back at the beginning of this. I mentioned the kind of funny people, the panel. They did bring up a really good point at the end of it that I wanted to highlight. They provided like the biggest clues to what I feel about this. This will still sell out, especially that bundle. And Nintendo kind of knows that. However, the big issue is the long-term health of the choices that Nintendo's making with this launch, especially for families. It's a major doubt with the rising costs everywhere and now tariffs. Like, again, this will sell out day one. I have no doubt of that. There's enough Nintendo fans out there that are loving everything they heard from this or liking it enough that they'll pick it up day one. We've been talking about it before, even earlier. There's people that love this, people that hate it. There's enough people that love it that it will sell out right away. But a year or two from now, as families are getting squeezed and squeezed more, we don't know if this system is going to be the same like success that the Switch 1 was, right? Because I don't think families are going to be able to like get multiple of these systems or get multiple games. They're going to have to get one, keep their old one. And that was my concern wanting to get a Switch 1 when the 2 launched, is people are going to be holding on to the Switch 1 now. And that value is not going to drop.
Well, even here's a good way to put this. Even if you added the total of the amount of units sold on a Switch, right, and you take half of that, because let's just say it's double the price. You're, instead of getting one Nintendo 2 Switch, you were able to get 2 Nintendo 1 Switches, right? Like even per household, even if they sold 50% of that market share, they're still selling an exorbitant amount of consoles, you know, for for this generation. It's kind of crazy stuff if you think about it in that perspective.
Yeah. What do you think, Ace? We've talked a lot. You've been pensive.
Again, mostly just looking over all the information, and again, I think, at least from where I'm sitting, like, sure, the three of us here on the panel, we're not necessarily your average consumers, but I think my viewpoint on this is about as close to being the average consumer as we get, because I don't have my finger on the pulse of, say, certain trends that we need to be taking a look at in order for additional context, like economic trends or manufacturing trends. So I'm looking at all this and I'm thinking, from a personal standpoint, like, say, if I wanted to get if I wanted to pick up a certain game that was coming out on the Switch 2, then, yeah, eventually I would have to hunker down and purchase the system. But you mentioned, so many families, so many people have already picked up, the Switch One, and the Switch Lite, and the OLED model, and even with the market share that Nintendo has, even with the sheer number of people that are going to be purchasing this system, because yeah, like you said, there is no doubt about it. That thing's very likely to sell. That thing's very likely to sell out on launch. I mean, it may hit a point where there may be another shortage of it, but they're not going to capture the entirety of the market because so many of us are still going to be holding on to our old systems to begin with.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to go, what's worth it for them to buy a Switch 2?
Right.
If they're like, is Mario Kart the thing that's going to, break that line with them? Like, maybe to some. And of course, some people just love having the newest and brightest thing, right, that to be released, right? Of course, there will always be those people. But like for people that are like, maybe funds are limited. Maybe they're a little bit more like, well, the only thing's going to make me go buy a Switch is a Super Smash Brothers 2, right? Something like that. So that's how you explain value to somebody. Right now, whatever that's out to them, like the price doesn't matter because what's going to break them is the thing that they want, which they will have make access to buy that console, right? So if they said Street Fighter 7 was going to only be on a Switch 2, we're all going to be upset, but people, we're going to buy one. You know what I'm saying? That's just how this works. And unfortunately, Nintendo knows this with their Nintendo products, right? So if you love Nintendo, you want to play Metroid 4, that's never going to be on anything else but a Nintendo Switch, so good luck.
Right.
That's how they get you.
But also coming from a more average consumer standpoint, throwing in my experience with working with Nintendo customer service, I can say this: there is a lot about the build of the system itself that, whether I'm going to pick it up or not, there's a lot that I do appreciate because they're addressing a lot of the major pain points that were coming up with the Switch to begin with, like cooling and ventilation, for example, with that built-in fan on the dock. How many system overheats is that going to prevent now? How many companies have tried? How many third-party companies have tried coming out with, their own variant of the Nintendo Switch dock that has a fan built in?
How many overheat calls did you ever get?
I would say out of all the calls that I'd taken, and I'm talking both tier 1 and tier 2 tech support, I would say overheats were one out of every 15 calls.
And I'm assuming 10 out of 15 were stick drift.
Yep.
Okay. Clearly not high on there.
1 out of 15. 1 out of 15 were overheats.
Okay. So here's the problem.
7 out of 15 at the start anyway were stick drift, but it eventually got to the point where 9 out of every 15 calls I had taken were in regards to account and game sharing.
Okay. So it sounds like that's been kind of covered, right? The game share is there. The fan is there. What have they told us about the stick drift? The most called thing for Nintendo. I don't think they've talked about anything. Like
other than the larger control sticks.
Yeah.
No, they haven't said much about that.
Yeah.
What? Since most of those consumer pain points had been addressed, that right there may very well be the value tipping point where someone might decide to go ahead, pull the trigger, pick up a Switch 2.
Yeah, they haven't said too much about the stick drift because it's a little too early to see how it's going to turn out. The fact that they are bigger and the fact that there's been some discussion online on like subreddits and stuff that are technical side things, and that was off what Tech Foundry was doing. When they're looking at it, it's got a new gate on it, so it shouldn't have the same issues that the Switch 1 did. It's going to be more like other modern console joysticks, like housings and setups, which is great for the Switch and the people that had issues with that. But we don't know the long-term issues. It was the same thing that came up with like Mario Kart. Mario Party. Mario Party destroys joysticks. Like, you could do all this work to make it more reinforced and better, but it could still come up with the same issues, and we're not going to know. It's going to be those Nintendo titles, for better or worse, right?
Which games are going to like just beat up your equipment, you know, also at the same time.
I mean, come on, Street Fighter 6.
I mean, that's not like Mario Party, dog. If you can't differentiate the two, you haven't played Mario Party intensely.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. After hearing you talk to, like, I really agree with a lot of your points, Ace. For me now, like, hearing that, I'm still kind of circling back to, like, Nintendo fans are going to love this. The people that are already in their ecosystem, and it will sell out. For someone like me looking to jump in, why would I want to switch? One of the reasons is old school games. So I'm looking at having to buy, if I'm looking to get in right now, the Switch 2, probably going to have to get the bundle. There's a lot of like nickel and diming even in the showcasing. Now, again, you go back and rewatch it with this lens. We saw that tech demo thing is paid. You have to pay for the tech demo. It's
so
not
crazy.
Free.
That's insane.
The camera, if you are interested in that, and there's reasons to be, and we saw with some of the Treehouse stuff, it will be in like pulled into certain games, like mini games in Mario Party will utilize that camera if you have it attached kind of thing. So if people who do want to utilize that, even with its 5-10 frames a second, as you're talking to your friends, it's only free for the first year. Then you have to have the premium. And for me, like wanting to play those older titles that they emulate on their own system, like I have to have Nintendo Online. And if I have Nintendo Online, I have to have the expansion pack if I want to have access to more classics, the Game Boy Advance, the 64 games, the Genesis games, select DLC. Like, I have to have more. I have to have more payments to get the things that I really want for it. And so I'm watching the showcase. I'm like, I'm feeling nickel and dimed at every level. And it's starting to make me feel negative about it or push off about it. And I can understand why people would have that same response too.
Yeah. Like for example, I already know a bunch of people that will get a Switch 2 just because of Dust Blood.
Yeah. Oh, and they do that too.
They paid for that game. 100%. They're like, oh, people want Bloodborne? All right, keep it on the Switch. they understood the excitement.
I mean, I'll put it to y'all this way. When I initially wanted to get my hands on a Nintendo Switch, there were 2 games that I was looking at getting. 2 games that I absolutely wanted to get because those were system sellers for me. Astral Chain and Daemon X Machina. But at the time, again, I didn't have the financial leeway to do so. Before I even got my hands on my Switch, Daemon X Machina had already released on Steam, so I was able to sit down and play that game. Thus, less reason for me to pick up a Switch.
Hey, there you go.
Monster Hunter Rise, same thing. Switch exclusive at first. I was like, I'm going to need to get that if I'm going to play Monster Hunter Rise. I eventually did get my first Switch, but we're not going to talk about what happened with that. But, I had it for Monster Hunter Rise, and it was great, but eventually Rise came out on multiple platforms. So, at the point... excuse me. At the point where I didn't have a Switch for a while, I still had access to DXM and Monster Hunter Rise. Same with the Switch 2. The next Daemon X Machina is going to be multi-platform, so if I did have any sort of inkling on purchasing the system, it's a little bit less now.
Hyrule Warriors?
It's value versus cost. Excuse me.
Where else can you get Hyrule Warriors?
Even Hyrule Warriors. It's like, I can hold off on that.
That's another thing we didn't really talk about, and again, I don't want to go off on a tangent. We could talk like this for hours, but also the cost to update games for the Switch 2 versions, and like I said, the nickel and diming that I felt from it. It feels like a lot of stuff were just kind of pushed back against, and again, that kind of anti-consumer kind of thing. Whether they meant to or not, it was a conscious decision, and the optics of it are really playing against them right now. So I think there was some stuff breaking out on X and some different news platforms about how some of the directors or devs for the original Switch that are no longer with the company, or devs of some of the titles are talking how this is kind of like a watershed moment for the Switch 2, because Nintendo is not sure how this is going to play out or how this is going to end up for them. Like, you can kind of tell just with like this mass misinformation kind of thing. The value just doesn't feel like it's there. And I mean, we saw that with the stream, the Treehouse streams. News was breaking about, and I sent James that screenshot. People just shouting into the void to drop the price on every stream now. So I don't know. They did show off some cool stuff, and again, what we're seeing here on the screen that James is sharing, the little map thing. It's like, yeah, that's cool and all, but do I want to pay that much extra for that? No, you want to pay for the better frame rates. They showed the side by side in the performance in the forest. It's like night and day. It runs so smooth. You're like, oh, that's great. I see why this is a good value here. But then you see the cost to upgrade, or you have to buy if you didn't have the original one, you have to buy the new one at the higher price. You're just like, man, I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, clearly it's still in the infantile like version and level of the information that we have to come out. Because here's the thing: the system could come out and it could be just utter dog shit. Like, stuff breaks, like a red ring. Even though I don't know it's possible, but right, you know what I'm saying? Like, we don't know yet until it gets to the hands of the consumer and live for the people to break, or to just I guess like capitalize on. So we just don't know. Value is based on how much you're willing to pay for it on the lowest common denominator, right? What's the least amount or most amount somebody can pay for something? So, right. But to them, I think it's always been the case of like, they want to sell hardware so they can sell you more games. That's always been the case. I don't know if that's still the case anymore, but I feel like that's why they always sold consoles at a loss, for us to buy more of their games, because that's where they really make their money from. And we all know, you and I, Nick, that the MSRP on new games aren't even that much higher, so they have to sell hella copies to make it back. So it's a tough
return on their investment.
Market. Yeah, it's a tough market, man. Like, so for a lot of people that don't know the nuance and the concepts of like why things cost a certain way, it's because you don't see those back, the cost of certain things and manufacturing costs, right? And they still got to pay people, no matter how good or bad the game is, like when they develop the game. So it's a rough industry, and it's like, and for us to kind of sustain this, it's better to educate yourself and understand why things cost a certain way and be more educated in your purchases, versus just emotionally responding to headlines and saying this is trash, yada yada yada, because you're probably doing more damage to the industry than you think you are, versus helping it, right? So just keep that in mind as my final thought.
It's a weird place to be in. If we're doing final thoughts, like, are we surprised that games are $80? No. Will this price, keep some people out or deter them from picking up releases? Definitely. We may see more indie games grow from this. The industry is going to do what it needs to do to survive. I don't think it'll be a crash, but it'll definitely be a drop kind of thing, because we're just going to have to figure out what works, what doesn't, especially with these tariffs. Like, if tariffs now raise the price in the US market, if it's no longer $450, if it's like $556, then it's like, oh my God, like, no. And Nintendo's going to have a whole nother crisis on their hands. So, yeah, like I was saying earlier, my big takeaway from this is, if you love Nintendo games, this is still going to sell out. It's still going to be a place to play them. But if you're kind of on the fence or you don't know, like, just the discourse and the polarizing comments around, like, every post about this shows that there's people that are excited, there's people that's not. The larger picture is like, people in the US market just have less disposable income. So you just have to make a smarter choice about this. And think about, is the price worth it for me? And that's really going to tell you whether or not when you're looking at this.
Yeah, 100%.
So even before you could get down to, considering the value proposition of a particular piece of software, you got to think about value versus cost.
Well, I mean, I feel like cost is going to change depending on what kind of game it is. The value is always going to be based on the personal basis, because remember we talked about
cost. I mean, literally, like, financial barrier to entry.
Oh yeah, well, that's totally different. That's a whole socioeconomic thing that we have to discuss on if this is even viable for the average consumer. You know what I'm saying? But if we're specifically talking on value, that's my expertise. I'm a cheapskate, right? So If we're talking about value and cost will always. This is why they have double, triple, and single A games. To me, those are the cost levels of how much money they put into a game. Assassin's Creed, triple A, right? Anarchy Reigns, double A, easily, right? And there's some games that I played. I recently just beat Werewolf the Apocalypse. I literally said, if this game was triple A, it would be so much better. But they only had a double A money, so it only felt like a double A experience, right? But that's when I noticed these guys have talent, they just don't have the money. Right, so that's the big one. Another thing, a nuance there that we have to also consider. Not to not to kind of skew away from the topic. Specifically, that's what's on the screen here. Elden Ring is a AAA title, right? And this is going to be the same cost as, like, let's just say a game that's not worth AAA, you know. But here's the thing: we can't determine that. It's just how much money they put into that. Value for me, though, I didn't buy this on launch. I bought it when I first got on sale. So to me, the value to me is, even though it's fun, it's a great game, I don't prioritize this game over the other games I already had. So that's what I mean by value, right? So everybody's going to have that certain value. This is the same conversation in accordance to the Switch 2. What is the value to you guys? Is it day one? Is it the first price drop? Is it going to be like, I got to check ABC first in my life before I get a Switch 2? Or is it like it's a must buy on day one? Like, what is it to you? I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on that. And Andre says he's going to skip PS6. You know, clearly no value to him for the PlayStation. So, yeah, I mean, I think you already did your last thoughts, Nick. Did you have anything else?
No, I said my piece.
Yeah, Ace.
Yeah, like, really, in closing, just as much as I would like to see this. As much as I would like to see this launch, really succeed, while there's a lot going for it, there's a lot going against it. So I really do want us to be able to just, watch the waters, watch how things go from here on out. But always, give yourself time to look up the information and look up the context around something. If you're really interested in making the purchase, do your homework. If not so much, then hey, kick back and keep it pushing.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even if you have the money, and you have the money to burn, I would still make wise decisions on it, because you may end up buying a piece of, like, a door stopper, right? So, and if you, like, for example, I bought a Switch purely for when I travel, but I don't travel as much, so it's the least used piece of hardware in my house, right? But when I do play it, I'm in there. Like, I play what do you call that? Dave the Diver all the time on there, but I can play that on anything else. That's the issue, right? But I only play those type of games when I'm not in my house. What kind of type of game is David Diver? That's up to me. That's how my lifestyle is. So dictated on how you calculate your lifestyle, how you play video games, right? And what's that worth to you. So, and if you need more information or more help from us, of course, reach out. As always, if you guys need a second opinion on something, reach out to Ace. If you like, Dynasty Warriors, reach out to Ace. If you want more information about the industry, reach out to Nick. If you want to bitch and vent to me, reach out to me. I'm here for that as well. If you want to, like, have a nice little debate, I'm all about it. So to kind of get another perspective on certain things. So aside from that, man, we promise you guys an hour and no more, because if you want more, check out the Gaming Academy on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we talk about a variety of different things, like This Week in Gaming History, also more quick bites and news from the rumor mill with Nick. And also, if you want to learn a little bit more about Monster Hunter Wilds and the weapon variations, stay tuned for The Tech with Blazing Ace Nelson. And of course, we appreciate you. Every minute that you spend on our stream is always a great time with us. And down the road, we'll hopefully bring you more and always better content Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But with that said, that's all I got to say, unless my guys here have anything else left.
Nah, we're good to go. Y'all have yourselves a great weekend, and we'll catch you back here on campus on Tuesday.
All right, guys. With that said, session is over. Let us know what you think about on Switch 2, and we'll see you Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Don't be late for the next session, the next class. All right. Have a good Sunday. And Gaming Academy out. Have a good night.